Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. It's an honor and privilege to share with you an update on the national HR standards and to see the important role that the HR standards can also play to accelerate and advance skills development in South Africa. Now, I'm sure you will all remember from the FIFA World Cup 2010 how good South Africa was for 6 weeks. Everything was working, there was no crime, and everything was just perfect. And despite FIFA, we were really world class those six weeks. And I want to propose to you this afternoon saying, I think we need to get back to that spirit that we had at that time. But the reality is we will never be able to improve and to excel to that level of world-class excellence if we don't get skills development and the human resource side of our businesses right. So I briefly want to share with you why professionalization and occupational skills development is so important. I will then give you a very brief overview of the HR standards journey. I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. And then I will end with the HR auditing framework, because what does it help us to have a standard if we're not auditing it? Similar to what the previous speaker said about measurement and the important role of having a proper monitoring and evaluation. And when there's no time left, I'll do the conclusion for you. That's a deal with you, Peter. Okay, I also want to share with you very good news today, and that is that the Minister of Justice has now approved HR and training managers as commissioners of oath. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Okay. Okay. And how did we achieve that? We took this particular project to the minister and we said to him, but surely if you look at what other people are doing, like police officers and accountants and so on, the important role that HR and training people are playing in the organization is absolutely key to the success of the company. And therefore, the status and credibility of human capital practitioners have contributed to us achieving that major task of becoming commissioners of oath. So no longer do you have to go to a police office or to a post office when they're not striking, or to an accountant or to a different building in order just to get the document certified. You can now do that yourself as a registered HR professional in accordance with the NQF Act. That is the good news. The bad news is that if we look at the average organization, is people have got different perceptions about the role of HR and skills development practitioners. I mean, this is maybe what your friends think what you're doing. This is what your mother thinks you are doing there in your office. You feel very important. What my wife thinks I'm doing, I'm just playing golf and feeling very important there on the golf course. This is the next president of America. What society thinks I'm doing, I'm just firing people, getting rid of people from organizations. What I think I'm doing, I'm Superman or Superwoman. What I actually do is just to move paper from the HR office to the CEO of the company or to the Seta or to the Department of Labor. And I think this is the reality of the perceptions that people have of HR that we need to change if we really want to deserve that credibility and status that we need as professionals in the workplace. But why do we really need standards? Standards give us a level of acceptable quality that we know what good practices are all about. It tells us what is good and not in terms of professionalism, what is good or normal or usual as far as practice is concerned. It's also a guideline for practice in the workplace. Standards provide a foundation for reasonable expectations about sound judgment, and ultimately it helps us to do proper measurement when we do have good standards in place for the practices that we implement in our organizations. Now, if standards are so important, why don't we have standards also in the field of people management? And that's the reason why we've developed this particular project in order to develop HR standards. And as Peter indicated to you, it's the first set of national HR standards in the world. And it was not developed by me, it was developed by 468 HR managers from all 9 provinces who came to Johannesburg in order to develop these standards for South Africa. So those are the people we need to thank that today we have these national HR standards in place. Now, this is all part of a strategic journey. It started in 2013 with the development and launch of the HR standards. Then last year, we've launched now the HR audit framework that I will also briefly outline to you. And this year, we continue this journey to say, but yes, while we need to get our practices and strategies right, we also need to get the numbers right. Because that will give HR and skills development people the credibility that we deserve in the workplace if we can show the bottom line impact of the work that we do in our organizations. So we've then developed the South African HR system standard model, and the model starts right at the strategic level of the organization with our business strategy HR alignment, where we have strategic HR talent management and HR risk management at the strategic business interface. And then regarding the HR functional architecture, we start right from workforce planning and then learning and development that many of you are working in, performance management, reward and recognition, employee wellness, employment relations, organization development, HR service delivery is the quality of the service we provide, and ultimately it's about the technology platforms that we use these days to speed things up. And lastly, it's also about HR measurement, and that is our ability to show the bottom line impact of HR on the organization. Now, how do we implement these practices? We use a typical quality management process where you start with preparation, implementation, review, and then on your improvements at the end, according to your quality assurance cycle. And the HR competency model that we've developed also help you to ensure that you achieve excellence in those 13 areas of HR practice. Now that was the good news, is that this model was developed and that there's a very clear guidelines on how companies can apply each one of those 13 HR standards to get your HR function work effectively. For your interest, knowing that you are in the field area of skills development, I will just give you a very brief example, and that's the learning and development standard. So we've clearly defined learning and development as the practice of providing occupational directives and any other learning, so that all other development that people have in order to advance your knowledge, practical skills and work experience, and behavior of individuals and teams based on current and future occupational requirements for optimal organization performance and sustainability. In simple language, it's about developing people for competence so that your business can achieve its objectives. That's the reason why we do training and skills development. So that's how the South African standard has defined it. We've then created a list of objectives that I won't be able to share with you today because of time, but in essence, it's really about competence and the importance of building a competent workforce. Now, each one will have certain learning and development programs in your company. You will look at your competency profiles, you will manage the knowledge in your organization, you will structure your learning function to do the right type of things or outsource part of that training if necessary, and ultimately you will monitor and evaluate to see, have you achieved training according to the needs of the business? And in essence, this is what any good training center or training department should be able to deliver for the management and the learners of the organization. So the standard is very clear what companies should do if they want to achieve competence in these particular areas. Now that was the good news. The bad news is we've now asked 250 South African companies to rate themselves against the standards, and this is how they have performed. The color green is for excellent, the amber is for mediocre, and the red is for very bad. Okay, and unfortunately at this stage you don't see too many greens there, so clearly you can see that most HR functions are struggling because the scores are out of 10 and they have to achieve 60% or 6 out of 10 in order to pass that particular aspect of your HR function. I'm glad to see training is not too bad, almost 58, just very close to the pass mark of 60%. One HR director asked me, how did you get to the 60% pass mark? I said, very easy, we just took the matric pass rate of 30% and we just doubled it. Because we really want to raise the bar and to say to HR functions, mediocrity is not enough. If you want to have a productive organization, you really need to strive for excellence, and you must ensure that the people side of the business is implemented very effectively. Now, better news is that now that we've developed an audit framework, and we've now audited 9 companies already, fortunately this time you see that some greens are coming in. Okay, so the 9 companies that we have audited, and it's about a 50-50% split at this stage between private and public sector, have performed quite well in some of the areas like strategic HR risk, learning also quite good, and others. But as you can see, we are still struggling when it comes to talent management as well as the measurement, because those areas are absolutely key for us if we really want to take our HR functions and the economy to a new level of excellence as far as the quality of our HR practices are concerned. Now, these standards are published in 2 standards files, and the standard files provide you with a framework and clear implementation guidelines on how you implement the practices. The 13 I've showed you already that have been audited now is in the first file. And then the second file includes a list of 19 specific practices that you do on a daily basis as a skills development or HR professional. And then you'll see there's a few professional practice standards for learning design, evaluation, needs analysis, leadership development, and so on. So there's specific learning standards that you also need to implement in your organization. So these practices range from managing absenteeism in the workplace right through to succession planning, when you also have to look at your next cadre of leaders that you develop in your organization. I recently presented this in Zimbabwe as well. I'm very glad to see that the Zimbabwean HR practitioners have now accepted this model also for their country, in order also to raise the standard of HR practice in Zimbabwe. The only problem they indicated to me in Zimbabwe is that the president does not believe in succession planning. But be that as it may, it's a good practice that we expect organizations to have at their companies. So what your CEO, ask your CEO tomorrow whether he does have a good succession planning in place. In South Africa, only 12% of companies have got succession plans. So the vast majority of companies here in South Africa are not ready for succession at the most strategic level of their organizations. More good news is that the HR standards have now attracted interest from 18 countries. 7 other African countries are already applying it, and very good interest from the West as also from the East when it comes to the application of the HR standards. More good news is that 21 universities are on board, busy changing their curriculum and their research agendas to ensure that whether a student exits from TUT or from University of Zululand or University of Cape Town, does not matter, that the students will exit now with the same level of standard when it comes to the quality of their HR graduates. Now, we've taken this process now forward to really say, if we want to get HR right, the standards are now the foundation of HR management. The competency model helps us, of course, to ensure that we have achieved the competence. How can I expect you to achieve a standard if you don't have competence in that particular standard? And that has been the spirit of this whole process. We are now also in an advanced stage of developing a national HR scorecard with metrics so that we will be able to show the bottom line impact of HR on the organization. I told you about the auditing framework that has been launched. Internationally, they're also working on an ISO standard for HR that I think is also very interesting news. Integrated reporting is being driven by the Judge Mervyn King with the International Integrated Reporting Framework. So in that area, South Africa is also a world leader. And we are in the process of lobbying to ensure that more HR governance will be integrated into the King 4 Code of Governance, because that will really elevate the work that we do here to the level of boards and excos and mancos of companies really taking full responsibility for the people's side of their business. And right at the top, we will have a variety of support interventions to ensure that the HR community is up to date with these trends and that they build their capacity and competence to apply these standards in practice. Now, if companies are audited against the standards, typically the auditors will look for 3 things. The first thing they will look for is the quality of your approach. Is it sound? Is it systematic? Is it integrated? Is it reviewed? Is it updated? What is the extent of the application? Is it only applied in Sandton or Tshwane, or is it applied throughout the organization in the different sites as well? And lastly, but very importantly, what is the quality of your results? Can you show over time trends in terms of the improvement of your HR function? Are those results sustainable? Are you meeting your targets? Are you looking at external benchmarks? And what is the approach versus the results? Is that linked and aligned and integrated according to the needs of the business? Now, we've now already trained 128 auditors who are now ready to audit companies against these standards. And I'm very glad to see that more companies are coming to the table and say, we want to be audited because we want to go back to our senior management and to our boards and tell our boards that the quality of our HR practices are up to standard so that HR will really add value to the organization. Now, when a company is audited and if they are successful, they will typically get a certificate like that, and that certificate then gives confidence to the HR director and the executive team of the company that your human resource practices are up to standard against the national HR standards. The first company in South Africa that achieved that certificate was TeleSure. TeleSure is the holding company, the group. Let's give them a round of applause to TeleSure. Okay, that's the holding group for Dial Direct, Auto and General. You'll know those guys. Okay, so it's an insurance group, and we've worked very closely with the whole HR team. We've sent in the 4 auditors, and the auditors are now happy that they meet that particular standard. And we would really like to encourage more of you to become involved in this, because the only way in which you can prove to your line management that HR is up to standard is if you get external independent auditors to come in and to put that report on the table. That's how the financial field has evolved and developed over 50, 60 years. It's only starting now with HR. But the fact is that can happen now, and that will give your HR function the level of credibility that it needs and deserves in order to add value. Okay, there is Kuleka, the HR executive at TeleSure. She indicated to us it really helped her to improve her processes. It also confirmed that the company is in the right direction when it comes to the HR practices, but she will be the first one to admit that it's also part of the system of continuous improvement, that you really take your HR function to the next level of significance in your organization. Okay, lastly, I just want to propose a few guidelines or steps for you in order to become involved and to help, first of all, your companies to meet the national standard, but also ultimately to improve the quality of the human resource work that you do in your organization. First of all, I would recommend that you really orientate your HR team as well as your management team in the organization so that they know what the standards are all about. The 13 standards are clearly documented. It tells you exactly what to do. So getting your HR team and your management team involved is a very good experience for them to really understand where this process is going to. Secondly, you can also train your HR team on the HR standards. I mean, how can you expect it to be audited on something that you don't really understand? So getting that proper understanding and knowledge of how these HR standards work is a very positive step to build capacity regarding the HR standards at your company. Thirdly, we would recommend that you compare your current practice versus the standards. Many of you have got fantastic practices in place. We're not saying throw it away. Keep on doing it, but reinforcing those good practices so that you can keep on doing those particular practices. If there are gaps, of course, work towards filling those particular gaps. And when you're then ready, you can arrange for an audit by the external auditors who will be able to indicate to you what the real quality of your HR standards are. And lastly, in the spirit of quality assurance, it's really about continuous improvement and taking your organization from being good to become an excellent company as far as the quality of your HR practices are concerned. So as you can see, the national HR standards have really positioned human resources in a new perspective. It has really helped us to put HR on the map, not only locally but also internationally. It gives us a new period of really institutionalizing good people practices so that your organization can function more effectively, but it really helps you to improve the quality of your HR function and the work that you do so that the HR work is aligned directly to business objectives. So thank you very much for joining this conference. You are the skills development champions. You are the people who make these changes happen at your organization, and therefore I salute you. And for those of you who have not yet been involved in this process, I really want to invite you and say now is the time for us to position skills development and HR at the top of the organization. It's really about adding value to companies. If companies don't realize business is not about products, business is about people. If they keep on trying to run a business without people, without leveraging and optimizing your people, your business will go nowhere. Thank you very much.